MythVision podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Have you ever seen some flying object you weren't aware of what it might be? I know my brother has, and several friends of mine. They think they've encountered. Some even think they've been abducted by aliens. But I also know some people that have said Jesus has visited them at night in their dreams or in their sleep or in their private room in a space when they're going through a tough time. I was reminded of Michael Shermer's book, The Believing Brain, about the man who had 14 words he needed to get to the president. No one would let him near, and Michael Shermer finally made a guess and said, I could probably guess what the words were. After psychoanalyzing the guy for a bit, he was going through a marriage, divorce type situation, and the aliens had something to say about loving humanity. So anyway, I have some wonderful skeptics here joining us on MythVision who have a new book, and they've had several in the past. Jonathan M.S. Pierce and Dr. Aaron Adair, welcome back.
Thank you very much for inviting us to talk. I am older and balder than I was last with you, and you are younger and more beautiful, which is another reason why I don't think God exists. It's unfair that some people are more beautiful than others, just without any merit, and It's just unfair that we age, and that sucks. Anyway, that's rant out the way.
I'll write you a check for that. Aaron, what's up?
Well, apparently everyone's aging here except for you. So the question is, what's wrong with... Where are you getting your youth blood? All right.
Listen, I'll just put it this way. My father is not immortal. Okay. There's something going on with mommy and Zeus or Dionysus or Hercules. It's one of these people somehow. Anyway, me and mom have to talk about this later, but I think there's something in the blood, something in my genes. You have a book. Let me go ahead and show everybody. This is a really interesting book. Why did you write Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, Assessing the Impact of Discovering Extraterrestrial Intelligence on Religion and Theology?
Well, I wrote an article for Only Sky that was looking at a paper by two Christian philosophers called McNabb and Mackintosh, and they wrote a paper saying basically the title was something like "Houston, do we have a problem?" And it was looking at 6 elements where they thought the discovery of intelligent alien life could challenge Christianity, belief, religion, and they wrote that paper and looked at these 6 areas and said, we don't think it challenges Christianity and our belief in our religion. And I was like, not too sure. So I wrote a paper broadly around that. And then I wrote an article, and Aaron read it and was like, hey, this is a pretty cool subject. And then we got talking. And then before you know it, we started writing the book. And we used that Mackintosh and McNabb paper as a kind of central part, because we concentrate mainly on Christianity, but not exclusively. We do the science, first of all, in the first part, looking at whether alien life is likely to exist out there. Then we look at Christianity and the effect it might have on theology and whatnot in these 6 areas we'll talk about in a little bit. And then we look at other religions, and then we make our conclusion. And it was such a fun project because it touches on so many areas.
Wow. And for me, this goes back quite a bit because when I was still an undergrad, I was able to do a summer internship at the SETI Institute, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and got to use their radio telescopes for making measurements of the sky. And while we were doing those measurements, data was being pumped from those telescopes, split off in 2 directions, one for us doing the normal signs, and the other one's into a bank of computers, looking for any signs of artificial signals that could potentially come from another civilization. So I have had professional experience hunting for aliens. And funny enough, I was just thinking that actually, when I was at the SETI Institute, that's when I was also writing my first article about people trying to explain the Star of Bethlehem story. So I've been mixing up religion and aliens a little bit longer than I ought to have.
So you're a scientist by profession, correct, Dr. Adair?
Yeah. That's fair to say. Most of my research is either physics related or it's in data science work that I do in the private sector.
And you have a YouTube channel here. It looks like you throw things up from time to time, squiggly lines that I can probably never understand.
The whole point is that you watch it and do understand it. The whole point is that, hey, these are little mini physics lectures. I haven't produced any of those since I was teaching at one college. And the last video I put up from a little bit of prodding, I should say, from Kipp Davis. Kipp Davis did the prodding, aliens do the probing. You got to keep those straight. Okay.
Thank you so much, man. I always appreciate you. And then we have Jonathan M.S. Pierce in the house. Jonathan, I'm going to put you here in the seat real quick and just highlight you got a YouTube channel, A Tippling Philosopher. Seems like philosophy is your thing, correct?
Yeah, so that's what I love talking about anything, as you well know. I mean, you get me going and I won't stop. But I've got a channel doing geopolitics, so talking about the Ukraine war, and I've got a channel doing, talking about philosophy, particularly in terms of philosophy of religion. And this the great thing about a book like this is it touches so many subjects. It touches psychology, it touches science, sociology, anthropology, and obviously religion, philosophy, theology, biblical exegesis. So it's a really kind of I reckon if you read it, it's a sort of book that will just float your boat no matter what you kind of think. It touches a lot of bases.
Mm-hmm. So, guys, you wrote this book, Aliens and Religion. Let's dive in for a little bit into some of the topics, your introduction here, as well as letting our audience know that we will take super chats along the way as long as they're relevant. If they aren't relevant to the subject matter at the time, I'll try and push it to the end and we'll get to it. So that way we aren't disrupting the flow of the conversation, because there's always someone who wants to, what's your dog eat on Tuesdays? And we know that that's perfectly relevant to aliens and religion. And so what would you want to say as an introduction for our audience to your book and the topic? Because I'll just throw this out there. When I was a Christian, this whole idea did come up. I remember hearing it and thinking about it. And people would go, if there's life on other planets, I was a young Earth creationist, by the way. So we were the center of the universe and everything is about us, right? Creation itself was made for man. But if there's these green Martians or gray Martians or any type of non-human form aliens out there, this would probably make God be dead. That this would disprove God. And I would try to make sense and say, no, God's the God of all the planets and all life in the universe, but couldn't really wrap my head around it completely. Where do you want to start?
If I go for this first, and then Aaron can take over. Really, the main question of this book seeks to answer is: does the discovery of intelligent alien life out there, whether we come across it, face to face, or whether we have techno signatures of it somewhere in the distance, does that make the existence of kind of Christian omni-God, if we take the main part thrust of the book, but God in general, but mainly let's take Christian omni-God, does it make belief in or the existence of that entity more or less probable? Yeah. And our summary is, the TLDR of the book is, it makes the existence of that God less probable. But we do a lot of work to get to that conclusion.
Okay. Yeah, and a good chunk of our book as well is just trying to think or figure out what possible sociological impacts there could be. And one of the seminal books that actually helps put this together was the work on cognitive dissonance theory, which was realized by the study literally of a 1950s UFO cult. Leon Fessinger and his grad students basically infiltrating that group and watching them fail to make an end of the world prediction, and how they handled that when the aliens didn't come by. And that has allowed us to see some insight that even if the aliens come, they land in front of the UN and basically say, we're here, we're very powerful, God doesn't exist, and we're going to blow up your planet unless you follow us, there will still be machinations within various minds to adjust to this new information. But nonetheless, religion will absolutely change. It will have to take in this new data. And perhaps the big question that we can answer before the aliens get here is, how well prepared is the religious mind of various denominations or faith traditions when or if we discover we're not alone in the universe?
I'll just add to that. There are two kind of things going on here. There is the effect and the probability of that kind of God existing. Right. Is one thing, right? And that should affect whether people believe or not. But then you have cognitive dissonance reduction, which is like, no matter whether you're faced with, if you're faced with really good evidence against your position, likely it is you're going to entrench in your position type thing, or you have mental heuristics that will allow you to keep holding that core belief, right? So,
Right.
So then it's like, okay, well, what will happen? What should happen, and what do we reckon will happen with religious belief, and in fact non-religious belief as well, if we were to discover intelligent alien life.
Just highlighting Leon Festinger, that's a wonderful study to dive into, understanding cognitive dissonance, and I'm glad that they infiltrated the cult. It's interesting. I had Matthew Hartkey at my house. He loves using this as well in his understanding of Christianity with cognitive dissonance, and thinking about what if the students of Leon Festinger never did, or they did not do this social study and actually see what was going on behind the scenes in this cult. And he said, there's so many movements in history that we only get like a single word for that we know that existed. Like maybe Justin Martyr mentions a group called the Moluccans or something. I'm just making something up. We have no clue about them, what happened, how they had beliefs. But I did know that Origen in his commentary on John, just an example, brings up another Samaritan group that had a Samaritan Messiah. It's like a 2nd century writing, Origen's writing, late 2nd, early 3rd. He's saying that this group's still around, Samaritan group, who said that their Messiah, their Samaritan Messiah, never died. Like he's still alive. And this guy, scholars, like most scholars who study that, say this is a 1st century person that they think was around at the time. What happened with this group? We just don't have any documentation. And so if it weren't for them infiltrating, we wouldn't know what was going on in the minds and really have a good case study to understand how the brain works. It's taking the satellite right now that's going off to the edge of the universe and finding out there's massive objects right there at the edge as far back as we can see, which makes us think the universe is older than we thought. What if we find out that there was no start at all? There was no moment of beginning. Well, they'll just shift a new way of saying, well, in the beginning, obviously wasn't ex nihilo. Just giving you kind of a reference pointer. So there's always a way to make it work. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. I could easily see how a philosophical Christian could say, well, when we say God created, we're not saying in a temporal sense, but just that God is ontologically first and his existence pervades all of time and space. And so that's what we mean by God created the universe, not at 0700 hours on a certain day of the week. So I know that's the sort of philosophical hoppery that can happen no matter what we find.
Right.
And you also have, different types of religious belief will treat the discovery of intelligent alien life very differently. So your evangelical Christian, who might be a young Earth creationist, has a very constricted way of interpreting reality, constrained by all these add-ons that they put onto their belief system, will struggle a lot more, and will maybe even get to the point of denying the existence through denying the data somehow. Whereas your more liberal Christian, who's kind of like very adaptive to different bits of data, will arguably react very different to such a discovery.
I agree. We got a super here. I hope it's relevant, guys. Constellation threw some big bucks at me. Thank you so much for the support. Bought the book and waiting for it. I have a request. Can someone calculate in miles from us how far it would take to reach an electron ground state orbital and nucleus in a hydrogen atom? Would like to know that number. I can't do it.
Well, it's going to be much, 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 much less than a mile if you're talking, let's see, just make sure I get this right.
See, this is why you write a book with a scientist, right? Because I'll be like,
So I think basically you're talking about what would be the Bohr radius, because you're talking about the electron and its ground state. And if we're talking a hydrogen atom, so that's the simplest thing. So just have to take the Bohr atom and convert that from meters or micrometers into miles, and it's going to be some stupidly small number. So give me a minute, I'll give you a calculation.
So this is why I did make Aaron. Aaron gets quite excited about stuff like this, and he writes like formulae, and he writes in languages I'm not too sure. I mean, he says they're English, but they've got lots of numbers in. And so what happened is I made him put those parts at the back of the book. And so at the back of the book, we've even got graphs and stuff. I don't really understand it. I read the words, but it's so he's got
they are
that,
words, I swear.
yeah. So, but actually, in all seriousness, and Aaron can explain this. We did some. I say we, the royal we. Aaron did some real science in this book as well, which is quite cool. So I don't know, Aaron, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, well, just first to answer the question. So the Bohr radius works out to about 3.3 times 10 to the minus 14 miles. So that is 3.3 divided by a trillion divided by 100. In other words, it's a number too small to be useful. It's also on the order of like 2 trillionths of an inch, if that helps.
Which is great because I didn't even understand the question. So
yeah, and I'm just sitting here saying thank you to Constellation Pegasus for his financial support.
Yeah, but I'm happy, of course, to convert from metric to freedom units.
Hey, look, guys, I titled this thing kind of blunt. If aliens are real, is God dead? Right?
Yeah,
I threw that out there, kind of like, what does this do with religion? What does this do with God? Tell us what the difficulties are as you're diving into this about alien life and this whole notion pertaining to God's religion and such.
Yeah, so I would first say that we have to devote a fair bit of time to the beginning of it because it's ultimately a scientific question, a scientific hypothesis, because we have not been conclusively visited, claims aside, what you might have been hearing recently on the news. But the question then can be, all right, is it just speculation or do we actually have good grounds to think that there's alien life out there? How would we even identify it so it can actually be a testable scientific hypothesis rather than just some other freewheeling idea that these crazy atheist scientists come up with? Of course, we're hardly the first people to think about alien life forms. The idea goes back at least into the Hellenistic period because we see that Epicurus, the famous philosopher who articulated first the problem of evil in the way that we understand it. He talked about other worlds with life on them. There's entire... one of the first pieces of science fiction from the 2nd century AD includes a Star Wars. There's literally a battle in space between aliens. It's not our modern Star Wars, but still, it's like, hey, these ideas have been around for a while. The reason we can think that aliens do exist is that we can look around at the universe and realize, you know what? We're not actually all that special. Our planet is one of several around one relatively normal star, and that star is one of 400 billion in our galaxy. Our galaxy is one of hundreds of billions of galaxies in just the observable universe, which itself may actually just be these weak limits of what we can see. The actual universe could literally be infinite. And with all that space and us looking fairly regular in our composition and in our placement in that grand cosmos, you'd have to say, okay, this principle of our mediocrity would suggest we're not alone, that we're not going to be the special thing just thrown out to the universe, that we will have neighbors. The question just is, how far away are they? And what can we do with our technology or near future technology to find them? And that's the first big chunk of our book to show, hey, we have reason to think they are out there. We actually have some ways of trying to estimate that using some mathematical tools that were first developed in the 60s and we've developed a bit since with some simulation techniques to say, you know what, more likely than not, we have neighbors 50-50 if they're in this galaxy with us, but almost certainly somewhere in the observable universe, there's a cousin of ours looking out and wondering if we're here.
Yeah, and what then happens is it kind of depends on how big you think the universe is. Because if you think the universe is infinite, I mean, we have ideas about the observable universe, but then, what's beyond that? If the universe is infinite, and Aaron can tell you the likelihood of that being the case, then of course, if you think that there's definitely going to be at least one instance of intelligent alien life existing out there in an infinite universe, then there's now infinite examples of intelligent alien life,
Right.
and that then is pretty massive. So when you mentioned apex of creation, I think earlier, Derek. So if you have this idea, as many Christians do, that we're the apex of creation, then how does that work with the idea that actually there's infinite amounts of intelligent alien life out there and infinite space? And like, why is there all that stuff out there if it's all about us? Do you know what I mean? Why are there microbes on the planet Zebok out over there? I mean, what's the point of that if it's all about us? And so this then goes back to the notion of it depends what kind of Christianity you have or what kind of theism you have as to how it affects your belief system.
Yeah, and there's some history here because up until about the early 17th century, the church, both Catholic and Protestant up to that point, had some pretty clear views about the existence of aliens, and the answer was no, and you better not think there's actually intelligent life out there, because if you do, that's a heresy, and we know of at least one person who was burned at the stake for committing that heresy, Giordano Bruno.
Oh, wasn't he like was he like 1600s, 1700s?
1600. He was burned in Rome in February of 1600, basically down the street from the Vatican. There's a monument to his site where he was burned at the stake for various heresies, but apparently of those about 10 heresies, the one that seems to be the most prominent in the Inquisitional records was the claim of the plurality of worlds and having people on them.
Which is interesting because actually Christian apologists tend to deny this. So they try and kind of massage history or and say that actually no, he wasn't burned in the stake for that. But I think people have been able to look at records more closely recently to find out exactly as Aaron says that is one of the prominent reasons why he was executed.
There's so
which
many...
is to finish that thought, which is interesting because someone's then therefore being executed for a more accurate understanding of the universe and reality than the religious people had at the time. So we spend a lot of time in the book talking about divine deception. So if and Aaron can talk about a really important part, which is how the Bible gets cosmology wrong. But the Bible gets cosmology really, really wrong, and then church fathers run with it, and early church thinkers and philosophers take that on board and go with it. And so you've got this thing where, well, if this is your optimal revelation, God, then it's deceiving people because it's giving them a false view of reality. Now, it's not, and Aaron can talk about this, not like they wouldn't have been able to understand it at the time, because there was contemporaneous understanding that was more accurate than the claims in the Bible. And so it looks rather dodgy here, and it looks like God is purposefully deceiving the readers of the Bible.
Now, what do you do when someone who believes the Bible is true in some way, they hold this book as sacred, they may not be Christian per se as Orthodox, but they think in ancient alien-ish terms. They think the Bible is the book about aliens. The Bible is about, and they'll even, like, if they're open-minded enough, and many of them are in some ways, they'll say, well, not just the Bible has this. The ancient Sumerians had the gods come down and slave the humans to mine the earth for gold for their planet. You know, the list goes on their ideas, and they'll use like Sitchin's interpretations.
Oh, yeah.
There's several problems with that. But what do you do with those people who think, well, the Bible is about aliens?
Yeah. So it's interesting because there have been a number of Christian writers who actually try to use aliens to save the Bible. Because if you look at this book and, like, say, it's the 18th century, you're in England, and you got all these crazy deists running around telling you that, the whole universe works with these natural laws and miracles can't happen. But you got this book with all these crazy miracles. You've got this guy who can multiply fish and walk on water. You got to be like, well, I believe this book, but I also see how the universe actually works. Oh, they must have been natural events misunderstood in some sort of way. So you get some English people, trying to find ways of re-explaining the stories in Germany, in particular, the rationalist movement there, of how Jesus was not actually walking in water, but it was a dark and stormy night. It was really foggy, and the disciples couldn't tell that they were beached, and Jesus was just walking on the sand. Things like that to explain the stories. In many ways, I've had some people with theological training write these books to try to explain the Bible in terms of all flying saucers. One priest back in the 60s wrote this book called The Bible and Flying Saucers. And basically, all the supernatural events, alien spaceship, parting of the Red Seas, aliens. Jesus ascending to heaven, aliens. Star of Bethlehem, oh, come on, aliens. It's just, aliens all the way down. And of course, Ezekiel's vision, totally aliens. Right. So in many ways, it's kind of a rescue operation.
I've got a pamphlet here written by Brother Michael Diamond, right? And it's called UFOs, Demonic Activity and Elaborate Hoaxes Meant to Deceive Mankind. So this is kind of the other way around, which is like seeing UFO data and explaining that by sort of demons, rather than seeing aliens in the Bible, seeing almost theology or the Bible in aliens.
Yeah, and it really depends on the time, because starting in the 70s, the stories of abduction started becoming, or encounters with aliens started becoming more and more negative, with the story of Barney and Betty Hill, with their alleged abduction experience back in the 60s, then becoming this big media sensation in the 70s. And when it became like all these things about being abducted and being probed, and your memories being erased, and you being sexually assaulted by people from another world, then they took on this much more demonic presence. So you actually see the interpretation of aliens in theological writings of that kind to switch from, angelic to demonic. So again, it depends on who you read and when you read them.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we can come down to and say, there's a good reason we can be pretty sure these stories are not about aliens, is because, just as you were saying, if the aliens were coming down and, instructing us or giving us technology or giving us knowledge, they did a pretty crummy job, because you look at the books that are supposed to be attributed to their granting of knowledge and you're like, wow, this is about what I'd expect from somebody in the Bronze Age, or this is what I expect from somebody who has maybe an inkling of the astronomy that the Greeks had developed, which itself, was very flawed compared to what we know today. And I think the example is if we just, open our Bibles and we just go to, chapter 1, verse 1, and we look at Genesis, and if you, let's see, just go through our translation. The whole universe was in a hot, dead state. Oops, sorry, no, that's Bare Naked Lady's song. In the beginning, with that, when God began to separate the waters, it's like, wait, water separation? Oh, then you find out, the world is actually flat with this metallic like dome called the rakia to separate the waters above and below, because outer space is just full of water. The stars are just little lights put in the sky. Why are they there? Is it because they're worlds that we could possibly visit with new technology? No, they are lights there for signs and for seasons. It's a giant calendar. That's what the sky is for. It's not a place to go and visit or explore. There are no entities there to live on, because there's no worlds to actually visit. And the fact that, especially in Genesis, it always blows my mind. And he made the stars also. That throwaway line for almost the entirety of the universe. It's like, all these details about the different kinds of cattle or other creeping things on the earth. But trillions of stars, and he made those. It just shows that clearly they did not realize what was out there. And if you thought visitors from those worlds came down, they would make that clear. No, we didn't come through a hard tent.
So what apologists do to try and excuse this away? So the question is, why in the Bible did the writers get biblical cosmology so wrong, and why did kind of God allow that? If this is a divinely inspired holy book, then how come it's full of complete bunkum when it comes to actual claims about reality out there? And this is very similar to slavery, and I say this all the time. There are two things that I think justify us rejecting the Bible out of hand. Like, literally, I don't need to. I mean, I've written books of biblical exegesis, so I don't do this, but I do really in my head. I'm like, I don't need to give the Bible the time of day. Why? Because it got slavery so damned wrong, right? And if Moses doesn't come down from Mount Sinai and written on the tablets saying, rule number 1 is don't keep slaves, and rule number 2 is in capital letters, no, really don't keep slaves. They're bad. Like, is bad to do that. Like, that never happened. And so you have slavery being countenanced. And if God, this was his optimal revelation, and he knew in advance with divine foreknowledge that that book would be used to countenance slavery for 1,800 the last 2,000 years, then that book sucks, right? And it sucks big time. And so morally it's abhorrent, and I reject it on that anyway. So that's the slavery thing. But what apologists do is they say, well, well, humans just wouldn't have understood slavery at the time, that it was bad. And so there need to be this progressive revelation and blah, blah, blah. And of course, it's complete nonsense, because there's contemporaneous ideas that it was that were better, there were better ideas of slavery around in the ancient Near East. Right. But the same goes to the idea of biblical cosmology. Why did God not put the accurate understanding of the universe into the Bible? Well, we just wouldn't have understood it. We weren't ready for it. So there need to be this progressive revelation that took place. And Aaron can talk to the fact that actually there was contemporaneous understanding that was more accurate of how the universe worked at the time.
And just so that, like, I agree with you. It looks more like it's coming from man rather than the other way around. But to get into the phenomena of why is the Bible describing ascending up to heaven? Why is there descending down from heaven ideas that happen in the stories we find within the Bible? Why do you think that phenomena is there? Do you think, I'm feeding you kind of my thoughts right now, maybe you can correct me, the obsession and observation of the celestial sky, and that maybe they thought these were deities, as we see like Job describing the sons of God, which eventually be considered, angels, as we call them, but that is the place we want to be. We want to go there. So this is why we have these narratives of kind of like looking up, like twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And so we have this imagination that we've created in our literature, maybe seeing comets coming down. So there's natural observation of things, that projectiles, whatever, coming down to Earth, and the observation of the stars make that imagination of humans going up there or things coming down here into literature, into fan fiction, into legend, into myth, into cross-culture.
I imagine there's a number of observations they could have made to just notice, hey, that big warm thing in the sky, clearly it is responsible for the crops doing well or doing poorly. They could see the associations with the length of the days and the coldness and the growth of their corn and or other agricultural products. So they would have already realized there's a close connection between us and the heavens. It doesn't take a bunch of test tubes to realize that we truly are connected with the cycles of the universe. And also one can observe just from night to night the regularity of what is seen, and that the stars you saw last night will be the stars you see there before. That maybe certain stars rise in certain seasons, but they dependably come over and over again. And you could say that my great-great-great-grandparents saw the same rising of the stars, and that sense of celestial immortality you already see in ancient Egyptian religion, where those who are blessed will be able to live with Osiris in the sky. And also usually Osiris himself is associated either with like the constellation Orion. Isis usually associated with the star Sirius, the brightest star in the nighttime sky. So there's already almost a sense of astral immortality, which also then eventually leaks itself into the Bible. You see that most clearly starting in Daniel, about the righteous becoming like the stars in heaven, and then you get to the New Testament and you're like, yes, and oh yes, we will very much be that. And Jesus himself is the morning star, the great source of light. Philo, in his writings, he'll also refer to the stars and planets as theoi. He'll actually use the word God for planets, and this is, of course, an alleged monotheist, calling the stars gods and using I can't say the G word, it's the theta word to refer to these objects.
I just think about that phenomena, you know what I mean? Like, that's just why we've done that. And so I can see how it's not a huge leap to UFOs. It's really not that big of a leap to see why someone comes along and goes, see, I knew UFOs all along. And they can anachronistically kind of backdate their ufology into the whole biblical and world religions kind of.
Well, I think, was it Carl Sagan in The Demon Haunted World, which is a great book. It was talking about how basically UFO experiences and abductions, or not necessarily abductions, but the experiences people have of coming across UFOs or aliens, is just a modernized version of people having sort of demonic or angelic experiences. And actually, it's just an updated version of that, essentially. And I would go with that.
Mm-hmm.
Got some super chats here. I'm going to try and hit real quick. Constellation building on our little atom thing. Okay, help explain emergent properties from that scale.
All right, let me get out my whiteboard.
Yeah.
I mean, in the most fundamental ways, I'm going to have to be very hand-wavy with this, but fundamentally, the distances and the arrangements of the electrons in the atoms pretty much describe atomic bonds, and from that you explain chemistry. From chemistry and chemical interactions, you can get the very complex molecules that form the biomolecules that make up life. And of course, from life, you get things with brains, and then with enough things with brains arguing with each other, you get politics and you get the modern world. That is an extremely fast jump through all those hoops. But it ultimately comes down to the little things setting up the rules that can then be used for the next big piece. And it's just a big, giant collection of gears when you really stare down at it.
Thank you. Durin Chow says, in the NOI, what's that mean? NOI? Elijah Muhammad said the wheels in Ezekiel are the mother plane. These planes are the UFO.
So I know what the vision is supposed to be, the vision of Ezekiel, where it says wheels within wheels, with eyes on the wheels. And, other Old Testament scholars have looked at this and said, this is actually the imagery of God's chariot, which rolls around on the rakia. So again, it's not really a UFO because it literally is a chair with wheels driving around the surface of the hard firmament. Also, I think it even mentions that the chariot has like this fire for producing smoke in that. So that would suggest that if this is an alien spacecraft, it's powered by coal. And I can tell you, that ain't how you get across the universe.
Oh.
Not with steam engines, no.
Eventually fossil fuels. And then it's this, and then it's that, which is very odd. Michael Apple, thank you for the super chat. Hopefully our alien religion encounter is less like Childhood's End and more like Third Rock.
For context for everyone, Child's End is one of the first major novels by Arthur C. Clarke, where the aliens come, and there's some interesting stories there. I won't spoil too much. Third Rock is a 1990s sitcom with John Lithgow as the leader of this group of aliens, basically trying to blend in with the rest of humanity, but are always looking a little bit weird.
Thank you so much. Chris McCarthy says, the excellent film Contact, based on Carl Sagan's novel, portrays the impact of the discovery of ET on culture and religion. Have you seen it?
I have seen the film. Was the ending not very Carl Sagan-y? I don't know. I've not read the book though, so I can't tell. There was something like the particularly anyway controversial, I thought. But.
Yeah, I've read the book and I've seen the movie. I recommend both. It's been a while since I've read the book to see how well it stands up. But I would say almost certainly go read. Trying to think how different it was. I mean, like Ellie's encounter with her father at the end is, I think, different than the novel, but there's still plenty of agreement generally between the two. But when it comes to showing the response, some people extremely excited that the aliens are here, and it just becomes like this big media circus. And Gary Busey in that movie is also some crazed preacher who blows up the first machine based on the alien tech because he's basically his own miniature doomsday cult. Is Sagan right about, or at least the film right about that? I think so. If also memory it serves, they don't actually say who did the bombing in that first incident in the book. I think they leave that vague. In the book, they make it clear. It's like, no, you see the person pressing the button with the suicide vest going off. So it's like, for whatever reason, in the film, they decided to make that clear. Also, the movie was basically required viewing when I was at the SETI Institute. Like all the other interns basically got together and just we were all watching it on VHS on the tiniest TV that was in our room, and we just all gathered there for it. Wow. And while it's fantastic, it makes a huge math blunder. And because we're all science nerds, every time we hear it, we're just like, oh God, how did that get through the script editors? Where it says like, there's like 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. If there's just a 1 in a million chance this, and a 1 in a million chance this, and a 1 in a million chance this, then there'll be millions of life forms. And it's like, no, if we actually run your numbers, there's like a 1 in a billion chance there's anything. So how you're off by like 15 orders of magnitude or something absurdly wrong. And it's just like, the most wrong you could possibly be in a film.
Especially with
There you
the
go.
scientist behind it, right?
Yeah, Sagan was like part of the script editing. I don't know how that got past him, except for the fact he was helping work on that script in his dying days. So who knows what might have slipped by.
Patrick William, thank you for the 20. Before we invented aircraft, all UFOs were boats, chariots, etc. So that was number one. Number two, sightings are up 1,200 times since UN founded. They want aliens to justify world government. Number three, aliens only visit crash in U.S. powerful nations. Coincidence odds equals 0.
One of the things I like to say, which is sort of tangentially connected to this, is if aliens did cross the universe to come and visit us, they would require, and Aaron can talk to this, they would require the harnessing of technology that is mind-blowing. They would require the harnessing of energy that is mind-blowing. You can talk about the Kardashev scale to try and explain this, but basically it would be phenomenal. So they would appear like gods to us, actually, in many ways. Arthur C. Clarke's third law is like anything that's sufficiently advanced in technology appears like magic, which, you know, when you had the conquistadors going to South America against the Aztecs and they were firing muskets on the back of horses with metal armor, the Aztecs had never seen anything like this. And, you know, someone's flash was going off here and someone's dying over there. It's like, whoa, that's magic. It's just science, mate. And you're not as technologically advanced. But anyway, I contest that aliens would cross the universe with all their knowledge, and you'd think they'd be able to see us from afar and get a really good grasp of what we were and how we operated from afar, right? Rather than having to hover just above us, abduct some drunk guy and shove a probe up his ass just to find that, you know, they've crossed the entire universe for that. And then they go, oh, it turns out there's some feces up there. Who knew? And then send him back down. And he's like, oh, my goodness, I had the craziest night last night. It's like, that's just absolute garbage. Anyway, sorry.
Thank you, Patrick.
Just to go through the
there's lots more to say to that. I wasn't really
should I keep it up?
Yeah, keep it up for a moment. So let me start with number 2. Sightings up 1,200 times since UN founded. So I think there could be an interesting confounding factor. Aircraft are now far more common since the UN was founded, and it's not because the UN has made a bunch of aircraft, it's just they've now become commonplace. In fact, one of the earlier studies by the US government of UFOs, like part of Project Blue Book and things like that, they figured that maybe about half of the UFO sightings that were being reported was the U-2 spy plane. And the U-2 is not controlled by the UN. I can tell you that. That was designed by the US to spy on the Ruskies in the old days. Though I shouldn't say the old days. The U-2 is still used today, actually. And yeah, the aliens only visiting or crashing US. More often than not, that's the case, though. You will see stories of aliens coming down in places in Africa, in Mexico, and things like that. But yeah, they seem to only crash and then only get reported about like decades later with somebody saying, oh, I know, and the government's keeping it secret. And well, that's actually the most recent round of things, when a person who says he was told by a guy who was told by a guy that he saw alien stuff.
Yeah, in the book you talk about the instance of the policeman chasing a UFO, but it turned out to be like a star. Is that
Venus.
Correct?
It was specifically Venus.
He stops a car and asks, hey, did you guys see that thing? Did you see something falling out of the sky?
Sorry, I missed that.
There's like a cop recently, he was driving, he saw something. A lot of stuff's over California, I noticed. And they're like, even the cop was freaking out, pulled like next to someone's car and said, hey, real quick, did you guys notice something falling out of the sky? Like, there's like tons and tons of this stuff right now, especially with the government footage. I don't know if you know Mick West, the skeptic of...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, we actually cite him in the book to discuss one of the alleged alien craft in the Navy videos that started to be released, 5 years ago now that video came out? But yeah, one of the incidents we talk about with a different police officer, this was in the 60s, and so there was already like this heightened awareness of alien reports out there. Just these were a couple of cops in Ohio, and just like the weeks before, there was these stories coming out of Michigan of UFOs. But surprisingly, the first person that came up with the idea of swamp gas explaining UFOs was actually a person who was a believer in UFOs. But he thought like this particular incident was, I think this is just swamp gas. It's causing some refraction of light, and that was confusing some people. So this is what's going on in the news at the time. And police officers see this bright light in the sky, think it's moving. They hop in their police car, and they are just driving for it at full speed. They're going over 100 miles per hour. I think they go all the way into Pennsylvania, trying to chase this thing. And if you look at the path of what they're following, you can see what was in front of them. You put up the star map, and you realize, oh, that bright light they saw was Venus.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an easy mistake to make, right?
Yeah.
But I guess there's a lot to be said about the context that people are in when they are seeing these things and being influenced by prevailing ideas at the time. So I think part of what your commentator was saying is kind of spot on. Part of it may be a bit conspiratorial, but yeah.
So I guess I kind of posted the title as like, if aliens are real, is God dead? How would you answer that question? Because many people who read the Bible think aliens and angels or demons or whatever, right? So
there's a lot for God to explain, especially how does the story of our relationship with the Almighty work if we're not the most special part of creation, and in fact we're one of trillions of created intelligent species. And one of the issues we talk about with the mediocrity principle, or the Copernican principle, we're not going to be special if there are other intelligences out there. Well, aren't they also going to have a relationship with God? And how does that work? And Jonathan, take that away.
Well, yeah, so the Copernican principle is really important to an awful lot of stuff that we discuss in the book. So the Copernican principle is like, imagine a bell curve. And if you don't really know much about the existence of what exists out there, then you say, okay, let's say there's potentially trillions of intelligent alien life forms out there. Okay, where do we fit in the range of, say, intelligence, in the range of morality, in the range of in the image of God? And there are loads of stuff like and suffering and evil. So all of these things, like, we think, oh, there's so much suffering and evil on this world, but actually there could be an entire galaxy that's been eradicated in the same way that we talk about a genocide here. There could be intelligent alien life form out there that is so intelligent it's vastly superior to us. So the Copernican principle says on all probability we are going to be somewhere in the middle. This gets pretty interesting when you're talking about all of these things. So for example, evil. So take this, right, Derek, you live in a world, right, where stubbing your toe is the most horrible thing that can happen, right?
Okay.
If I ask you, well, how do you explain an all-loving God in light of that data? You would say something like, oh, it's a bit difficult, but you'd be able to give some kind of explanation, right? Now, the question for you, Derek, is, would it be more difficult for you to explain the suffering that takes place on a world where we have cancer, Ebola, genocide, rape, war, all these terrible things? Would it be more difficult for you to explain how an all-loving God could exist in that world? Would it be more difficult than to explain how an all-loving God could exist where you can only stub your toe?
Yeah, it would be a lot more difficult. I mean, keep adding to it and you have more problems.
Exactly. Okay, so therefore the amount of suffering we have in this world makes that kind of God less probable than a God in stubbing toe world. Right. Now take the Copernican principle, and the amount of suffering on this world is going to be really distinctly average compared to some of the suffering out there. Right. So then when you start understanding that things can be way to orders of magnitude worse out there, then actually the probability of an all-loving God existing is at least lessened. Right. So that's just one way of looking at the Copernican principle and how it can take effect. Another really important one is in the image of God. Right. So, Derek, you can look at your fish that you've got in your fish bowl over the other side of your office. You say, God, I'm in the image of God. I'm Derek. Look how handsome and amazing I am. I'm like, this is godly. I'm divine. That fish, that's a fish. That's not an image of God, right? So, and think about that relationship. Now think about the Copernican principle again, and imagine an alien out there that is more in the image of God. We are just averagely in the image of God. And we look at that fish and say, that fish is not in the image of God. There's going to be an alien looking at us saying they are that much more in the image of God compared to us as we are compared to a fish. So there will be aliens that are far closer to divinity than we are, and yet we think we're the apex of creation. So what does that effect have on Christian belief, for example?
I mean, that would be that. Like, what is Jesus? An avatar for only the humankind? I mean, at what point do you? Yeah, there's all sorts of issues.
That's one of the biggest sections in the book. Aaron, you go for it.
Yeah, you've stepped on probably what is the biggest controversy within the theologians who are discussing this, and they're known as astrotheologians. So this is not the astrotheology of Acharya S. This is applying theology to the case of we have extraterrestrials out there. How do we fit them into the story? And the thing that they're pretty divided on is, okay, was Jesus coming into our world, dying and rising, a one-time event, and we humans are the lucky ones in the whole universe? Or does Jesus have to incarnate into the intelligent life forms for each of those worlds? And so there could potentially be not one Jesus, but billions of Jesuses. In fact, there could be multiple Jesuses in the universe at the same time, because with all the different possible life forms that could be out there, there's a pretty darn good chance that, hey, Jesus have to be literally in more than one place at the same time. And so you have not just many Jesuses, but a bilocating Jesus who's just like going in and out of both realities. Well, apparently, teaching, suffering, and rising from the dead across multiple worlds. And we'll be doing this not just once, but billions of times for billions of years as new civilizations emerge throughout the cosmos.
And this is a really big, as Anna has said, this splits astrotheologians. We sit off to the side, right? And we look at all the criticism that multiple Jesus advocates have of a single Jesus advocate. And we look at all the criticisms a single Jesus advocate has of the multiple Jesus advocate. And we just eating our popcorn going, yep, all of you are right because both of you are wrong. But this is certainly a really contentious issue, I think. And what you have to do is there's kind of a ladder of processes you're going through. So first question is, does intelligent alien life exist out there? Okay, the answer is yes. Okay, is it moral? And we go through all this in the book and say, right, okay, it's likely to be moral. Okay, if it's moral, is it fallen? Well, if they're not fallen and we are, that's really unfair on us. So if God is surely fair, everyone should be fallen. Okay, so they're intelligent, they're moral, they're fallen. If they're fallen, do they need atonement? Well, if we need atonement, then surely they need it. Again, it goes into that unfairness thing. Okay, so if they need atonement, what atonement do they get? Do they get the same atonement as us? Well, if ours is the optimal atonement, surely they should get a chance of having the optimal atonement, or so on and so forth. So, okay, what is the optimal atonement? Is there only one optimal atonement? Is it an incarnated God in human or alien form? Are there other forms of atonement that are equally as good? So, there are all these sort of questions that eventually you get down to. I think it's more plausible that all alien life form would be fallen in the same way we are. I mean, if you believe in all that kind of stuff, and therefore they would all need atonement, and it's more probable that they would all have the same kind of atonement for kind of parity, for fairness, and so they would all have an incarnated God, in their whatever form. And the question is, as Aaron said, does one God rule, one Jesus rule them all, or do you need like a million Jesus, billion?
Which is why, like, this is making a case for some form of polytheism better than monotheism, in my opinion. Number one. If you were trying, if you had to go with a theism at all, it would be that one probably makes more sense. And you could still assume there's a supreme one above all of those that kind of like allows them to have jurisdiction of other planets or whatever you'd like to make. The Mormons are closer in some way. The other interesting thing that you said, there's a couple things I wanted to highlight that I thought were really cool. And it reminded me of that philosopher Xenophanes. Xenophanes. That
Xenophanes.
Xenophanes. If cattle and horses or lions had hands or were able to draw with their feet and produce the works which men do, horses would draw the forms of gods like horses and cattle like cattle, and they would make the gods' bodies the same shape as their own. Very old philosopher. I mean, this is 570 BCE to 480 BC, like way back there, who said that. Another interesting thing is looking kind of like, is it the Capernaum, what is it called?
Copernican principle.
That is pretty much like looking at ourselves and then kind of like trying to expand out in our thinking and look at the rest of the world, the universe. You can use as kind of an analogy here.
Is that would just say that whatever spectrum of characteristic you're looking at, we'd sit somewhere in the middle. We're just kind of average Joes.
So if we're looking at evolution from like abiogenesis, from chemistry to biology, we're looking at life and how it's like it's cannibalistic in nature, period, from the get. There's a book called The Short History of Life on Earth. Love it. I got to interview the scholar at some point. He goes all the way from like how life starts in the oceans. Ultimately, you have like the eating of algae, and algae is like trying to get some sunlight, but it's also eating. It ends up evolving to where you start having certain life forms coming out of this, and then they're eating each other. And it's like, for millions, hundreds of millions of years, life itself is eating itself to try and compete to stay alive. And we end up coming out of all of this. So it's like, I feel like all of these imaginative theologies and ideas and myths and stories that we've created are like trying to solve this innate, totally normal problem that we literally have today. Oh, should we eat animals? No, only eat plants. Oh, okay, so that's still life form, but it doesn't harm as much because it's not conscious. And it's like, we have to sustain in order to stay alive. We have to kill something. Humans cannot stay alive without killing something. So I'm looking at other planets thinking, if life is out there and it's intelligent, it is going to have the same problems. And I kind of chuckle thinking, what if aliens came here, we found a way to communicate, and they go, do you guys wonder why we're here at all? Why there's anything, and they don't know the answer, why there's anything rather than nothing, or those kind of questions. It's just,
there are loads of things we think about in the book that are sort of connected to what you're saying. So one thing is that if aliens did come down to Earth, and you think, well, they'd have to be massively more technologically advanced than us, and they would have had to have probably spent a lot longer time existing in order to get to that point. But there is the kind of there's a potential reality that they could be atheists, right? If you look at how our own societies have evolved, like if we extrapolate the growing non-religiosity in our societies and our more modern and advanced societies, then you can imagine that add a couple of thousand, maybe tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 years onto that,
right,
we might have taken, shed the shackles of religious thoughts, and you can imagine that actually you come down to us, and they might seem like gods to us, but actually they're themselves atheistic. And there's so many ideas to play around with. There's lots of game theory that Aaron can talk about as to whether we really should be looking for aliens, because they could be more powerful than us, and therefore we want to be being quite quiet and almost hiding rather than sending out signals going, hello, we're here.
Well, I'd hope that they would learn, if they were that evolved, to maybe, I don't know, there's no telling what their outlook is. If they see us and say, look at this bacteria, what if they know, like, they're like, yeah, nah, we know where this leads. I'd rather get, like, what if we're not on a path that's a good ending? And I've seen some of those alien movies where people go out, they find some form of life form, it's on the spaceship in a protected area, it gets out, it consumes everyone in the ship, it makes it to Earth, and now we're like, oh my gosh, you brought it to Earth. Human life is probably going to get destroyed and eaten by this life form. You know what I'm talking about, right?
But actually, so that's kind of based on historical and analogy. So there's something called the Columbian Exchange, right, which is Christopher Columbus founded it, or went over to the New World, and actually there was an exchange that went place, exchange of technology, exchange of this, but actually is far more for the benefit of Christopher Columbus as like the advanced civilization, if you like. But also there's a lot of death involved in passing on germs and illnesses and whatnot, and again, very much not in the favor of the indigenous populations. And there's an analogy to kind of what you were saying there, things escaping off a spacecraft and killing off the humans. Actually, we've literally seen that in the way that humans have migrated around the world in particular ways.
And like War of the Worlds, right? Tom Cruise famously,
Yeah.
then the aliens themselves start dying off. Like, these humans have given us all these diseases. We're dying. We got to get the hell off this rock. I have a super chat, and it's actually an interesting one because I know a person on Facebook. Let me first get this here. The In Veritas. Thank you for the super chat. Page 301, Rael. In the 1970s, can you speak about them, the Raelians or whatever?
Yeah. So Riel was this Frenchman, in the 70s. I forget what his original name was, but he claims that he encountered the actual gods, that they were aliens called the Elohim, and he changed his name to Rael and founded the Raelian movement. And they're a modern UFO cult. They believe that basically all of the gods were extraterrestrials of one form or another, and like any good cult, the gods are coming back. I think right now on their website they say that they are preparing an embassy for them, and their arrival no later than 2035. So they claim there that basically, as the name suggests, the Elohim, the Hebrew word for gods, taking that and then saying, Jesus an alien, I think Muhammad an alien, Buddha an alien, etc. All these sources of religious wisdom came from the stars, and that they will make their presence much more clearly known in just a decade or so.
Yeah, I actually know one of the followers who, I think I saw them message me earlier. They're talking about, so they just wrote me. They said something about, I think it's time to interview Raelian Rabbi Leon Ariel Malul, and there's his contact. But pretty much just sending me stuff like they are really part of the movement. And they wrote just now, you just interviewed Dr. Aaron Adair about aliens and religions. So I repeat, I think it's time to interview Raelian Rabbi Leon Ariel Malul. And they really want me to interview them. I told them I wanted to speak to the main guy who started the cult and interview them. And last time I tried to go for this discussion, that guy wasn't going to do it, but I could have interviewed maybe someone lower than that and talked to one of them. But I really wanted to talk to the guy and get his experience from his mouth and go, what's going on? And
is that guy you're speaking to called Pierre Charles?
Yes.
Yeah. I speak to him. Yeah, he's spoken to us.
Yeah, I am a little bit reluctant to want to maybe talk to his rabbi, because one of the messages I've also seen saying that the Raelians are the real Jews, and I'm just like, you can't say that in a post-Holocaust world and be seen as anything either serious or not anti-Semitic. So I'm just like, no, you don't get to do that. We saw what happens. Not again. Sorry.
It's just weird how so much of the biblical language gets hijacked for that particular movement. It's like the Bible seems to be the primary literature in which they are getting there.
Yeah, and this goes back a long time. If we go back even before most of the well-known UFO cults, if you go to something called the Urantia book, this was published in the 1950s, but it was probably parts of it written over decades. It's also claimed to basically be channeled information from extraterrestrials, and a big chunk of it is the real life of Jesus, and again explained ultimately through channeled information, which is basically a modern way of saying revelation. But with more aliens than the John of Patmos had.
Right. Durin Childs, thank you again. I don't think alien would visit us due to the fact we have nothing to offer them, but we shouldn't broadcast ourselves.
I generally agree with this. So if you imagine that aliens have got all this advanced technology, and again, I implore Aaron to mention something about, say, the Kardashev scale. But if they're going to be that far advanced to us, then really there's not going to be a lot that we've got that we can offer them that they can't get from another planet, I'm sure, without that was maybe closer. Or do you know what I mean? I think the probability of aliens going all across the universe to then find us and then say, oh, we really wanted coal or something, we really wanted lithium. You're like, really? You came all this way for that? You couldn't concoct some kind of substitute? I just think is really unlikely.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Kardashev scale. We've used the term twice now, so we should probably explain what this is. So this was a way of trying to say, hey, if we're going to talk about aliens, we want to talk about them being more powerful, less powerful. How do we actually go about and compare them? What can we do to put them on a scale? So this Soviet astronomer creates this scale that's based on what we think might be the universal way of describing the abilities of a civilization and its control of energy. How much energy are you able to harness and use to your ends? So at the most minimum, you got muscle power. And, you can lift some things, but that's nothing compared to a steam engine, which is nothing compared to a really good diesel engine, which is obviously nothing compared to a nuclear fission system, which will be nothing compared to fusion, or compared to building a structure to collect all the light from the entire sun. And these are the levels of imagination that you could have. So the scale that Kardashev had, which then was called the Kardashev scale, is okay, if you can harness and control all the energy that lands on the surface of your planet, so basically all the sunlight on your planet, you're a type 1 civilization. If you can harness all the energy of your host star, you're a type 2 civilization. And if you can harness an entire galaxy of stars, then you're a type 3 civilization. Interestingly enough, the jump from all of those are similar in orders of magnitude. And you might say, okay, well, where are we on that scale? Well, we are approximately a 0.7. Now, that sounds close to 1, but because this is a logarithmic scale, to actually get us to just type 1 status, we would have to produce 1,000 times as much energy as we do today. Now, that doesn't mean we need to build 1,000 new power plants. We need to build 1,000 power plants for every power plant we currently have. Which basically means there ain't enough coal to do it. We're not going to do this with fossil fuels. We are going to have to be way more advanced in how we make energy to reach even that modest level of where things could be. Now, we did some calculations in the book as well to figure out, okay, suppose that the aliens really want to cover the distances and get to us, and they want to do it in less than a geological age, because the problem is going from just the near star system using traditional rocketry takes tens of thousands of years. So you probably want to have a rocket or other ship that can go a significant fraction of the speed of light. And also, if you go really close to the speed of light, you can get all the weird time dilation effects. So locally, it seems like, oh, only a few minutes have gone by, and then you land on the planet, it's like, oh, 1,000 years have gone by. If you're going fast enough, you get all those fun effects. So we do some math together and figure, okay, a civilization that even could send such relativistic ships to us would have to be at least 1,000,000 times more powerful than us on that Kardashev scale, which would tell us, okay, it's definitely the case that they are not running their civilization on oil. They are not going to invade us because in the same way that people allege we invaded the country of Iraq. The oil is not going to be the reason they can travel the stars. So, and if it's other raw materials, it's a whole lot easier to get from asteroids that are just freely floating around. You don't have to deal with all these, buggers like us. You can just say, hey, you got these rocks floating around in space. Well, thank you. You've been if they're saying oh, they're here because they want our water. Well, first off, water is the second most abundant molecule in the entire universe, so not that hard to get. And two, you don't even have to come all the way to Earth. If you go to the moon Enceladus, or Europa. Yeah, let's go to Europa. That's a great choice. Go to Europa around Jupiter. We now know that there is water underneath its frozen surface, and Europa, this moon, has more water than all the oceans of Earth.
So there you go.
Yeah.
And
you're thirsty, go to Europa. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron's going to wet himself with excitement because someone in the live chat has just mentioned the dark forest theory, which we talk about in the book. Do you want to just mention that, Aaron?
All right. So this ultimately comes down to, I guess, the question of, hey, should we keep ourselves quiet? Should we broadcast ourselves? Should we even be looking for ET? So, spoiler alert, it's too late. But the idea in this game theory, which gets called the Dark Forest, it's based on... It became really well known after the publication of a novel in Chinese, but then translated into English. So the original author, Liu Cixin, first wrote this book called The Three-Body Problem. The sequel to it was The Dark Forest, and the third one is... Death's End. This trilogy is, I would say, very good science fiction reading. I strongly recommend it. in English. If you can read it in Chinese, go for it, but I'm not that good at Chinese yet. Nonetheless, in the second novel there, the aliens that are discovered in the first novel are not nice. They're coming to Earth. They're going to come and destroy us. But one of the revelations that humanity makes isn't just that we're not alone in the universe and we have hostile neighbors, but the entire cosmos is built fundamentally on the universe being a scary and dangerous place. Basically, you realize that every civilization is out to keep itself alive. And because of the great distances involved, you build up these chains of suspicion. You don't know what the intentions are of the other ones, and all you can do is basically get suspicious, and the same thing for them. And you realize, hey, if they're way more advanced than us, they can take us out. And if we're way more advanced than them, we should take them out so they don't have the chance to become more advanced than us and take us out. So everyone basically is in fear of each other and realizing this will lead to your destruction. So the only way you can remain safe is to hide. The metaphor is the universe is a dark forest filled with hunters. And everyone is trying to keep quiet because the person who is lighting the fire or making the noise is the one making themselves the target from all the other hunters.
This is such a, like, I want to say this relates to us as humans so much, because look at hunter-gatherers, look at the tribalism that we humans evolved from hunter-gatherers to, being agricultural, people, and it's us versus them kind of groups. But eventually civilizations occur, and then we unite and we find ways to try and collab with certain laws that allow us to try and follow certain paths. If people deviate from them, there's justice that's supposed to be served. And it makes you think, like, there's a huge risk if we do try to make noise and get their attention, especially if we were looking, and this is what I meant by the whole Copernican analogy. I didn't know if that was related to what I was describing on with our experience and our knowledge of evolution on Earth, and the fact that life eats life to survive and competes. There's always competition. It's pretty much you or me, and one of us has to go for life to keep going. Sometimes certain species are dependent on others as their life source, things like that. But my point is if we take what we see on this planet and we imagine certain elements from the universe out there on other planets, that life started the same way with them, and their habit is a dog-eat-dog world, and it's vicious. It's survival of the fittest. It is all out, I need to eat some substance. I need to eat other life forms in order to survive. What are the odds that this thing, these other entities, beings, life forms are even friendly? What's the probability? Have you ever done any calculations on the probability that other life forms on other planets are actually more friendly than being what you just described as potentially dangerous and actually ready to harm us?
I have not, but I think there are at least some constraints on just how nefarious the aliens could be, because you can imagine if you had a civilization that was the most anti-social civilization ever, that everyone is out for each other, well, then you couldn't have any level of cooperation, because if you're worried that every single person around you is a potential murderer or thief or thieving murderer, then no trust can happen, and you can't have any sort of trade or exchange of ideas. It would just be everyone running around with clubs and trying to beat each other over the head before they get beaten over. And in that scenario, you're not going to probably build spaceships. You're not going to even get out of the Stone Age, basically, because you need to collect all the stones you can to hit the other guy first. There's going to be some minimal amount of sociability, of social morality that an extraterrestrial civilization would have to reach advancement. Now, it's unclear if you'd have to be a completely peaceful civilization to actually gallivant about the galaxy. I mean, after all, we're getting close to sending colonists to Mars, and we're hardly a peaceful world. I think the Ukrainians could say something to that effect very confidently right now.
I know Jonathan has plenty to...
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. It is my hope that our future is that we do become more and more peaceful. There has been, evidence that shows that kind of trend, but will it actually trend to kumbaya sort of peace, or are we going to destroy ourselves? And this is actually an interesting thing. right now, we have no direct evidence that extraterrestrials exist or have existed. But there's an interesting consequence of our work and our projections. If we actually were to discover another civilization and just, say, hey, there's somebody else in the Milky Way galaxy, for us to have actually been able to detect that with our current technology, our current methods, would actually be astonishing, because given my probability that maybe there's one or two civilizations in the galaxy right now, they'd be so far away we couldn't detect them. So for us to detect them, they would have to be more numerous than we estimated for them to be close enough, just to be randomly in our detection range. And if they're more numerous, the equation that we use for figuring out how many they're out there, the only way you can get that number up is if their average lifespan of their civilization is long. From the Copernican principle, if they are long-lived and we're average, we could be a long-lived civilization. Discovering ET could actually tell us something grand and wonderful about our future. If we are just the C students of the galaxy, and we see that the other students out there have been around for thousands or millions of years, we have a long and glorious future ahead of us. So in some ways, that tiny bit of technology detected among the stars would tell us our future can also be among the stars.
One question, and maybe both of you can answer. I don't know if you have a different opinion on this, but if let's just say we could detect that there were alien life form on a planet far, far, far away, would you suggest we avoid trying to make contact, or would you say, you know what, it's worth the risk, we're just going to go? I would want to make contact.
Well, I would say if we're close enough for us to detect them, almost certainly vice versa, they can do the same. Mm-hmm. And it's almost impossible for us to even mask our presence as is, even if we said everyone, hey, turn off all of your radio antennas. Not only do we have this bubble of radio waves still leaving the Earth, going across the galaxy, the more important thing is they can also just look at Earth and tell Earth is a place with life on it. They, with our current technology, we're just on the edge of maybe detecting the sort of chemistry on exoplanets, planets around other stars, that would show the signs of life on them, and even potentially their own industrial revolution. So if we were in our near future, we're going to be able to have space telescopes that will be able to read atmospheres and say, oh, this atmosphere has a lot of extra methane. That's a pretty good, strong sign that there are life forms, because it takes life to produce a stable amount of methane in an atmosphere. But if we also say, oh, there's an increase in carbon dioxide, hey, there's a lot of nitrogen oxide, oh, it looks like this is a world that's going through industrial revolution right now. And we'd be able to tell that without the aliens sending a single radio signal. Just the presence of their planet will give them away. And that's with our near-term Earth technology. Aliens with 1,000 years more tech, they've been seeing us and eyeing us for a long time. So if we're trying to hide, too late. Cat's out of the bag. So we might as well say hi.
Right.
And it's quite easy to destroy us as well. I mean, Aaron, what's the stats about just firing a very small bit of matter at the Earth quite quickly?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine all sorts of different science fiction scenarios for how you could destroy the planet. Megavirus, nanomachines that turn everything into paper clips, red matter and turning us into a black hole like in the recent Star Trek movies. There's an even easier way of doing that. If you just take any clump of anything and just fling it at a significant fraction of the speed of light, it will have the energy, the yield of atomic weapons. So all you have to do to destroy the all life on Earth is just throw a bunch of crap at us really fast, and that's all the technology you need. Just throw stuff at us really hard, and humanity is done. We literally won't even see it coming, because if it's coming at close to the speed of light, then literally the light won't get to us in time for us to even notice, let alone react, let alone even think about how we could stop it. Where it'll literally be like, oh, what's that? Gone. End. Not even reaction time. And that's, of course, if the aliens are nefarious, we literally won't even see it coming.
I want to get to you, Jonathan, here in a second, because I'm bringing God back into the equation, or gods. I know you love getting deep into this in philosophy. Yeah. Ricky Johnson, thank you for the $3.
Ricky.
When the aliens come, you will get protected. Chris McCarthy, I'd love to see a large survey of religion leaders on. If ET is discovered, will they also worship your God? Would you two be interested?
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. Like, if aliens came down, what are the chances that they would try to proselytize to us? I mean, we talked about whether there's a high chance, maybe there's a high probability of them being non-religious. What if they're proselytizing? There is, in fact, what is it? I'm just trying to remember. I think you can categorize religion in several different ways. Here it is. So one aspect of contact with ETI is worth bringing up here. This is what we write on page 103. In light of the notion that any such aliens may have their own religious beliefs, the religions of Earth will have to be on the defensive. Ashkenazi, who's a guy that writes a paper about this, talks about there being three classes of religion in general: one, proselytizing religions; two, isolationist religions; and three, agglutinative religions that do not proselytize, not rejecting other religions, and often assimilating their beliefs into their own. When the Christian conquistadors with their class 1 religion met the class 3 Aztecs, Christianity prevailed rather easily, though painfully, helped along by the large power imbalance. Imagine the technologically advanced aliens coming to us with a class 1 religion, confronting humans with their own class 1 religions, but who might be on the wrong side of the power imbalance. So there's loads of things to consider here with what type of religion we have, what type of religion alien life form might have, if we were ever to meet. And I think so. My idea about intelligent alien life existing is it certainly exists out there. There's probably trillions, if not infinite, instances of it, but we are quarantined by distance. It's just too difficult to travel the distances required to actually meet face to face. So I think that's just highly unrealistic for us to meet any aliens. But it is interesting to think about these kind of thought experiments.
Yeah,
I don't know that answered the question there, but
makes me think of Star Trek. For example, you show up to a planet and there's a guy who's their god or a god or something. If they're highly intelligent on that level, I mean, would they come to our planet, see our human imaged deities with attributes like us from this planet, just heightened level of the attributes that humans already have, and they go, yeah, these people are backwards. They don't see how they're stuck in their little bubbles still. They haven't figured out that they're not the center of everything, and they're just only aware of themselves and they don't realize it. If they're more intelligent than us, I imagine they're going to do that. I just don't get how they wouldn't.
Now, it does also lead to some interesting thoughts as well, and I do agree with Jonathan that the chances that aliens will be visiting us, especially in the near term, is vanishingly small just because of how stupidly big the universe is. But even in that scenario, if imagining that somehow the aliens do cross the gulf between the stars and land on our cosmic shores, and they come down the gangway, and we see them, and we see they're wearing crosses and they're Jesuits, that is going to have to affect us as atheists, because we're going to say, all right, the chances of two remote worlds coming to the same very particular theologies is so remotely small that almost requires divine intervention to explain that. That's, an extreme scenario, but I could also just imagine the aliens come and they are religious, but they're also not only more advanced to us in terms of technology, but they've also been doing philosophy and theology for thousands of years longer than us. So while we're, stuck with Thomas Aquinas and William Lane Craig, they have their own alien William Lane Craig, who's been working on the cosmological argument for, 10,000 years. And you can just imagine there would be so much progress then that if the aliens came and they say, oh yeah, we're all totally religious, we have these great, theological arguments, I'd have to say, okay, you clearly know how to travel the stars, and so I'm going to believe you about, star drive engineering. If you're also more advanced than us in terms of philosophy, I'm going to be paying attention. That is worth listening in the same sort of way. If you find out, hey, all the experts agree on this thing, unless you can prove otherwise, you should probably go with that consensus. And all the more so if the consensus is superhuman.
There's so many what if kind of conversations that can come up from this. Like, what if they came here, they fully wrap their heads around evolution, and they actually come to bring a heightened understanding of how this applies out in the universe, not just on this planet. and can describe how certain other planets would have different kind of life forms based on certain chemical and substance reactions and stuff. And like we're like being blown away, and they're like, but this is our religion. Our religion, like imagine they came here and they found naturalist, atheist, skeptics like us, and they said, you guys are the closest to the truth about gods or God. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, we think there isn't a God. And they're like, no. Like all of the natural properties that you see evolve and that are sustainable, that cause things to be evolution, chemistry, the whole nine that you're doing from your science, we've now theologized that and made that a philosophical kind of worldview. And it is our religion. So it's a science religion. And it's the most heightened sense of intelligence in the universe. But they still make it some kind of religion rather than it necessarily being a deity. It's something else. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, they'd be so. Yeah. I guess if we had to give that species a name, they'd be the Spinozians.
Right? Technically, they'd come and be like, these are the smart guys. Ignore these ones who die on crosses and stuff. Okay, just run from people who sacrifice their children, you know?
Yeah. And of course, it reminds me of the cartoon of aliens coming and telling us, like, oh, yeah, Jesus, he visited us too. We baked him a cake. What did you guys do?
Oh my gosh. Well, we killed him. That's what we did.
Nice.
Anything else that you want to touch on, Jonathan?
Yeah,
you had a Bible full of topics.
I mean, goodness, there's so much. I guess one of the first things he says after 1.5 hours, one of the first things to say about approaching this is we look at abductive arguments. So just to remind people, let people know what abductive arguments are. They are inferences to the best explanation, which is to say that, deductive argument is all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. You agree with the premises, then the conclusion follows, it's a valid syllogism and job done. Inductive argument, all the swans I've ever seen are white, therefore all swans are white type thing. You're like, yeah, there's good probability that's the case, or the next one I'm going to see is white, or whatever. You can use probability, but it's not always going to be the case, right? And then abductive arguments are where you take some competing hypotheses, so say Christian omni-God theism and naturalistic atheism, right? And you say, let's look at all the data in the world. This is what we do in kind of theology, but actually let's look at all the data in the universe, including the existence of intelligent alien life. Okay, does that better support naturalistic atheism or Christian omni-God theism? And likewise, you can kind of flip that and say, what are the predictive powers of these? So what would the universe look like if we were existing in Christian omni-God theism, under Christian omni-God theism, and what we predict the universe to be like, and would we expect aliens given the Bible, given this and that? I mean, I don't know if I've done this with you before, Derek, but there's the thought experiment I like, which is, Derek, come into my house, mate. You know I love rabbits. You're like, yeah, I know Jono. He loves rabbits. He's like the world's biggest rabbit lover. So yeah, I've got 3 rabbits. I've just built a rabbit hutch for them. It's absolutely lush. You're going to love this. It's perfect for these 3 rabbits. And you're imagining, so you're predicting that he loves rabbits. What's this rabbit hutch? What's a run going to look like? It's going to be this sweet thing in his garden. I bring you out. I bring you through my house. I open the back door and say, look at this. And my rabbit run goes on further than the eye can see. And the hutch goes up to the moon, past the moon. Okay. And you're like, hang on, dude, you've only got 3 rabbits. Well, why have you designed and created all this? And you say, yeah, it's even better than that. You know how much I love rabbits? And you're like, yeah, I get that. Yeah, no, I really love rabbits. Over there, there's just, if the rabbits get too close to that area, it spurts out hot boiling oil and it can kill them instantly. And if they go over there, just over there, this is really nice, you like this, they go over there and they eat those mushrooms, they'll just die instantly. And if they go over there, right, then there's a black hole vortex that will suck them in. And you're like, hang on, mate, why do they need all this space going up past the moon? And there are only 3 rabbits. And why does this place look more like it's designed for them to die rather than to live? I say, yeah, welcome to the universe, man. I'm God. So the analogy there, I think, is quite a useful analogy to just try and understand the pure scale of the Earth and look at the abductive arguments here and say, is this what we would expect. Is this universe what we'd expect on Christian omni-God atheism? And you can flip that and say, does this data better support Christian omni-God theism or naturalistic atheism? And we go through looking at loads of data points saying, yeah, that's better supportive of naturalistic atheism. Yeah, that's better supportive of naturalistic atheism.
Now, this I got to ask you, Aaron, because not Aaron, sorry, Jonathan, because I have, and you can tune in too if you want to add anything to this, Aaron. But this, we always talk about omni-God theism versus atheism, and I know for a fact that several theists who may watch me, not the ones that feel offended in the chat, they're probably omni-God, but the ones who aren't offended, who are listening and actually tuned in, will go, yeah, but it doesn't destroy the notion of a God or gods, depending on the kind of version of theism that's showing up in the chat. I probably have Hindus who watch me. I probably have, you name it, that tune into MythVision. But like, you always hit the low-hanging fruit here, Jonathan, and that's the omni. It's easy to hit the omni, but these gods don't have to be.
It's not so much as easy. It's the most prevalent. I mean, we did a series on this book, right? And that's a God I take aim at in this book, right? And that's on purpose, because actually that's the God that most people believe in. If you ask most believers, unless they're like really nuanced, or the most general Muslims and Christians will say, well, do you think God is all powerful? Well, yeah. Do you think God knows everything? Well, yeah. Do you think God is love? Well, yeah. Okay, there's your omni-God. So, fair enough. You can have another version of God,
right?
But I just think that's less. I think it's less likely that people have that understanding of God, but it's possible. And the problem is, if you attack one version of God, then someone just says, well, that's not my version of God, so that doesn't apply to me. And it's just like moving a pea around in a shell game. The con man says, well, you thought my God was there, well, now it's over there, and so on and so forth. So it's not the low-hanging fruit. I think it's the most plausible version of God, but it's also makes its own problems, because those characteristics don't synergistically work very well together, and it's actually what most theologians over time have kind of built towards.
That's true. I mean, because I think philosophically and theologically they find a way to try and make it fit our understanding the best we know now, and allow that God to kind of fit the new box. I almost want to say the unfalsifiable new box, because pushing him outside space and time, making him this, making them that. And that's what I think a lot of Muslims who watch my show love to tackle, the problem of the Trinity against Christians. But they really do have this philosophical deity that they've come up with. And they think, well, this one's the one, and you can't find any flaws with this God, and you can't find any problems, and it's perfect. And to me personally, if there was something, for me, in my mind, if there is some form of a deity, it is far from anything, in my opinion.
That's what happens when you invite into the equation a kind of personhood. Okay, so like take Francesca Stavrokolopoulos' book there, God and Anatomy. What you've had over time is this abstraction of God out of like a biblical version of God or a Quranic version of God. If you're adhering to the kind of Hebrew Bible understanding of the foundation to the monotheistic religions, then you've got a corporeal entity that walks around, doesn't quite know everything, doesn't know where Adam and Eve is, has parts of the body, and then over time people have worked out that doesn't really it doesn't cut the mustard as far as theology is concerned. And so people have abstracted God for like 2,000 years, and you get to this really problematic position now where those same Christians and Muslims say, yeah, this is the God I believe in now, like you're saying, Derek, this is this abstract entity. However, I also believe in the Bible, or in the Hebrew Bible, the foundation of the Quran or whatever, and this is a problem because actually this thing is really different from this thing. And they're actually two completely different entities, and I would argue that those two are incoherent, but they still have to hang on to this because this is actually the kind of holy book foundation of their belief.
Right, and that's why might even be polytheism makes better sense in my head than monotheism at this point. If I were to try and get my head wrapped around it, or at least a form of henotheism if you want hierarchies. But I would only put hierarchies there because I see us, human civilization, and the natural world kind of work in hierarchies as well. So like that's the only reason I would do that. But
I think the most plausible version of God would be some kind of idealism where you've got an absolute spirit, which is everything and it underpins everything.
Okay.
And you live in a kind of everything's mental spirit, and our understanding of matter is actually just a representation of what our minds understand, or it's just a representation, but it's not the reality. And so there's a big resurgence in this kind of understanding of reality, ontology in philosophy at the moment. People like Bernardo Kastrup and others, idealists who have really good arguments actually, and are trying to use physics and maths as well to defend that. But I would say looking for God in that kind of way, which is a real kind of not really a God as a person, but God as like the basis of everything, some kind of absolute spirit of which we are a part, is possibly the most plausible version of God if you want to go there.
He actually had an interesting point about the universe itself, and he said, well, there's chaos. There's a lot of chaos and not structure. And he says in his opinion, that mind, because he calls it a mind, is it doesn't know, or it's confused. It doesn't know what to do. That's why you see the problems we see in the universe that we live in. That was his answer. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like an omni-God idea at all. Right. So it's just an interesting thing to kind of hypothesize, but this is why I always go back to, and it's a necessary thing we humans do, but like doing philosophy like this, it makes me think mental masturbation. It's like people who watch TV to like enjoy the entertainment of the TV. People who could just sit there and think on philosophy and talk like this stuff. Is just, you go off into a place in your mind for a while and think about these things, and it's so abstract. There's nothing concrete anchoring a lot of this stuff. Not all.
And then you got to go and put your washing on. Yeah.
And then you're back into reality. Like, whoo! I was past Mars in my thinking just now. Like, and then you're back, and it's all just out there in the wind in your mind. A lot of it is.
As a science fiction nerd, I can say that a similar thing will happen. Like before the Han Solo film for Star Wars, there were all these attempts by Star Wars nerds to explain inconsistencies in the story. In particular, when Han Solo says that he did the Kessel Run in under 12 parsecs, but everyone was like, but wait, a parsec isn't a unit of time, it's a unit of distance. So it's like, well, that's completely, wrong and confused. And so they came up, well, what's going on here is that actually the Kessel Run is a series of black holes, and to do it in 12 parsecs means you have to get super stupidly close to the black holes to make this trip in such a short distance. And these were the attempts to try to get around this, and you're putting all this energy into ultimately fiction that then gets turned into more movies of
that is brilliant
quality.
That is theology. What they're doing is theology. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Star Wars has this issue of canon nowadays, now that Disney has bought it. And now, like, all the novels are now called legends rather than, like, history. They're trying to differentiate things like that. So that's where a lot of that energy will go. But it is worth noting that in our book, we don't just talk about the omni-God, because we do talk about what are the possible intersections with extraterrestrials and modern Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, as well as the UFO cults. We try to look and see, well, where are like the other, texts or beliefs intersect with that. So, for example, reading some of the stuff from Hindu folks that are saying aliens are totally okay, and in fact, when it comes to reincarnation, it is possible that you'll be reincarnated into an alien body, or vice versa. So basically, if aliens exist, the possibilities for reincarnation are just grander. And so I look at that and I'm like, well, it's at least consistent. It's not like the issues that we see with the the multi-incarnating Jesus problem that astrotheologians deal with. It's like, okay, it's just there's now more animals of sorts that you could be inside of. And also was interesting to see that in the Islamic world, that in the modern Islamic world, there's all these attempts to actually try to combine aliens and previous beliefs. So, for example, we mentioned like how UFOs are called demonic in some modern Christian groups. If you go over to Iran, there's a lot of belief in ancient aliens and that the UFOs are being driven by jinn.
Right. I was just about to ask you, because it's so culturally and religiously relevant often on how they perceive things. But like, imagine they actually come here, some aliens, and everybody's like, hey, the Raelian cult, and they call up all the cult leaders, and they come in, and this alien life form is drastically different because I don't know who the hell you are. Like, like we're already assuming there's life, but these aliens come here and are like, no, we were not in contact with any of you, and we have nothing in common with any of you. But all these cult leaders from different sects of their version are acting like they have the connection to this extraterrestrial extra life out there that comes to visit. I think I could imagine that happening.
Yeah, I mean, we can already see the stories that people have told that have formed UFO cults or other UFO beliefs, and you have seen how they change through time. So, like, if you go back to the 50s with some of the first UFO cults, like the Aetherius Society that was founded by George King, says he basically, had a nice, friendly chat with these aliens, and he described them basically as these white Norwegian men and women. That was their appearance. So the aliens, basically, in the most perfect form, were Scandinavian.
Right.
And only like the modern view of the alien of this, kind of like bulbous head, big wraparound eyes, that really only started becoming part of like the cultural zeitgeist, again, when the story of Barney and Betty Hill started becoming well known in UFO culture, which only, again, took off in the 70s, especially with a more, I don't want to say novelistic account, but basically a reading, a book form of their sessions with their psychologist when they were going into hypnotic trance states to try to get back their old memories. That's apparently how they were trying to learn this sort of stuff. And then that was put into a book, that was turned into a movie, and that's how things exploded. And where did they get their visions of aliens? The funny thing is, like, basically in the weeks before their hypnotism sessions, there were episodes of this show called The Outer Limits that was on TV. And like literally like the week before, it had some of the very few examples of these bulbous head, big-eyed creatures. And then they go into these sessions and then they describe somewhat similar aliens. And you'd be like, I think we can follow the traces of where these ideas are coming from. And it's complete cultural contamination.
Nothing like a bit of priming. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with Deb Forel here. Don't knock hot Nordic aliens. Okay. Constellation Pegasus says, what are Aaron's and Jonathan's favorite chapter in the book, and why?
I can answer what Aaron's favorite is. It's the appendices in the back.
So this is the book.
Our book, like all people, should have at least more than one appendix.
The link is in the description. Recommended book is down in the description. So I hope you'll go check it out. The book is right now $9.99 before credits on Amazon, $7.74.
Yeah, paperback is obviously more.
Paperback's $22.99. Still, that's
yeah. Just to be safe, you should get both.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Just to make sure when the aliens come, this is the biblical handbook.
What's really nice about this is it's had some wonderful endorsements. So Richard Carrier said it's the definitive book on the subject. So someone who knows his onions says this is the definitive book on the subject. We also need more people to review it. It's only got one review, and that's not even a written review. But also, there's a NASA historian who has written on astrotheology, astrobiology, astrotheology. He says also absolute ringing endorsement. So if you like the top guy in the world that we wanted to like the book, I love the book.
Yeah. He's written a whole bunch of books about the extraterrestrial debate. It's like long history. He was the chief historian at NASA, and he actually coined the term astrotheology for this subject matter.
Yeah.
And
really?
And he was one of our endorsers. So it's like, yeah, that was a good fish to catch.
Yeah.
What is your favorite chapter?
Mine would probably be challenging Christian doctrines. So the six areas of potential Christian challenge that McIntosh and McNabb, the two Christian philosophers, looked at were challenging theism in general, challenging Christian scriptures, challenging Christian doctrines, challenging Christian tradition, exacerbating the problem of evil, and challenging the Christian narrative. That makes the core part of the book where we are taking God, particularly the Christian God, to town. But I would say challenging Christian doctrines for me would be the most meaty.
Okay.
The meatiest.
And I probably go back and forth between chapter 1 of all the discussion of if we're alone or not, and how to deal with the what's called the Fermi paradox, to explain if we're saying there's all this life out there, how come we haven't met them, we haven't detected them yet. That's one of the issues within chapter 1, but I think what might be more relevant to what's been going on in recent news is probably chapter 3, all the alleged evidences that the aliens are already here, they're buzzing our skies, they built our pyramids, what have you. We discuss the more and less scientific evidences put forward to say that we already do have strong evidence of aliens, and why they're actually quite wanting.
Okay, I got to ask you guys while we got the book pulled up here for a second, just to get your thoughts. You're both skeptics. You're both critical thinkers. Does this, for anyone who's a critical thinker like me, who really wants to go in and kind of use it as a tool or a handbook to be critical of the UFO claims, as well as how this, could impact religion on Earth? Do you guys take the whole alien thing to task as well? Like the claims that we've had so far, you're not denying, as I think all three of us think, there's life out there of some sort, some form out in the universe, period. Whether it's in our galaxy or not. I mean, I would imagine it would be, but just saying, like, we think there's life out there. The question I'm saying, do you guys take to task UFO claims and stuff?
What, like ancient aliens and stuff like that?
Oh, and modern.
What are?
And we'd also look at the modern claims that we talk about the UFO and the UAP phenomenon. Obviously not the most recent claims because they've only been in the news for like 2 weeks. Though people have been digging and realizing actually this person is he's basically repeating other things, and so ultimately he's laundering somebody else's dirty used ideas about these same things, but now they're just coming out of a different mouth to make another news cycle, but it's really just the same things. Like a person said they saw a thing, and what was that thing they saw? Oh, it was from the same people who say that they've been encountering interdimensional ghosts out at this ranch in Utah. I forget where Skinwalker Ranch is. A lot of it seems to be coming to the same people. There's this long history in the media itself to basically run with these fantastical stories because it sells newspapers, it gets clicks.
Got it. Constellation.
And just ancient aliens is just BS.
Yeah. If anything, we give actually how you would detect if aliens came in our past. Like what sorts of things would they leave behind in the most obvious sort of thing is this. If you're a civilization and you're developing on your own, you see basically this gradual change in your architecture, in your beliefs, in your science, in your mathematics. You could basically watch the progression over time. The way that you could tell another culture has come in and done some sort of contamination is there's some sudden change. So, for example, if you are an archaeologist and you're working in North America, you're digging through and you're in deep layers and you're seeing more traditional Native American objects, arrowheads, things like that. And all of a sudden you see this fine porcelain. You're like, okay, this is a sign of here's where you had European contact because of the very different items and technology coming in. The thing is, do we look around and we see all of a sudden, hey, here's this new vocabulary and or this new technology, things popping in just out of nowhere versus, oh, we can see either gradual change or we can see, oh, this came from these people over here on the other side of the lake or whatever. That's the sort of thing we see in every case. And the people on Ancient Aliens who claim otherwise, at best, don't know what they're talking about. At worst, are just lying for money.
Thank you, Constellation. Pegasus. Imnag with the super sticker. Thank you so much for that love and support, Imnag. Good to see you here. And thank you for the super thanks the other day. I just saw it, or yesterday. Really appreciate that. Is there anything else you would like to say about the book before we wrap up this episode? Because I think there's going to be, we have much to talk about. Just put it that way. There's much more we could do on a follow-up episode.
Yeah, I mean, goodness, we haven't even touched really the theological wrangles too much. I like to mention a couple of little sort of thought experiments, like, or not so much thought experiments, arguments. One thing that annoys me about the Christian approach to, say, or theistic approach to, say, the fine-tuning argument is this, and I often talk about this in the book, which is that we are just sort of holding on the very ends of our fingertips to life on this planet, right? We're very close to dying. You've got black holes, you've got you've got diseases, you've got all this kind of stuff, right? But you've also got constants that if you change them only just a little bit, life wouldn't exist in the universe. Now, theists look at all this data and they say, this is evidence that God exists. And they call this a fine-tuning argument. So it's just, everything is so perfectly balanced that God must exist because this allows life to exist. However, if you can imagine a situation where life was teeming in the universe was teeming with life. Everywhere you looked, there was life everywhere. There's life all over the moon. Life just, it was easy, and that there weren't black holes. There weren't, it was easy to continue living. And indeed, if the constants changed a whole bunch, life would still exist, right? Then the theists would go, look at that. This universe was designed for life. You could change all the constants and there'd still be life. You go, hang on, like you've argued that this is evidence of God. If you change the constants and we die, and we're just hanging on, and it's we're only just able to live, that's evidence for God. And you imagine a universe where life is so damn easy that you could do anything and life would still exist, and that's evidence for God. You're having your cake and eating it. This is heads you win, tails I lose. Do you see what I mean? And
I definitely get it.
I don't like that.
Yeah, because like imagine it was even harder for life to be than what it is now. Then it's just they'll just take that too and be like, I mean, what are the odds that this little speck of land on the planet Earth is the only place that's inhabitable for life? All the other places across the waters on our planet, life is not habitable, but the spot we're at, that's how good our God is. And then if you minimize that even more to the neighborhood within the city that we live in, I mean, like, it does not matter. God did it, and he's got our back, and it wouldn't matter how you chop it up. I would imagine they would find a way to make it.
It's like the Texas shooter fallacy, isn't it? Where, but that's what you're talking about. But yes, sorry, Karen.
Yeah. No, I enjoy it. Last minute, people were throwing super chats at us here. So William Arons, thank you for being here always in the chat, William. Sci-fi has two main storylines. One where humans struggle with starship technology. The other, the search for the meaning of life outside of this world.
I think that does capture a lot of science fiction. At least some of the most thought-provoking science fiction will definitely try to say, hey, what is our place in this grand cosmos now that we have the scientific worldview? And also the idea that we can use our technology to either create or solve our problems. And what does that say about where we're going to be going in the big picture of things? Some films have done a fantastic job imagining what that could mean for us, and even where it intersects nicely with religion. Like perhaps the most important theological film in science fiction, I'm going to point to 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still. And you actually know a phrase from that film, Derek, even though you may not have seen the film, because it gets reused in Army of Darkness, Klaatu Barada Necto.
Yeah.
That comes from this film.
No way!
Oh, yeah. When Bruce Campbell was having to learn that line from Sam Raimi clearly was watching other films. That film is basically about visitor from space coming with a message of peace, is killed for his beliefs, brought back to life, and told us about an apocalyptic end if we don't mend our ways and become a more peaceful civilization. In that movie, Klaatu is as close to Jesus as the 1950s was going to allow you to have in McCarthyism era U.S. history. So I wouldn't say the same thing about the remake with Keanu Reeves from about a decade ago. I can't speak as positively, but it's showing like, hey, once we have the idea that we are part of a bigger picture, how do we imagine we're going to fit into that? And that is both beautiful and terrifying.
Humbling.
Derek, I actually have to shoot right now to go and pick up. My kids have been on a school trip to France, right? And it's 11 o'clock UK time, and I've got to go and pick them up from their school. So just
we're wrapping up anyways here. Love you, man.
Yeah, I love you guys. Well, Aaron, not so much, but you, Derek, absolute legend. But just to say, I love you, Aaron, man. There are loads of really there's loads of really meaty arguments to do with philosophy and theology that we barely touched on. So there is certainly a lot more. There's a lot in the book. It's jam-packed. But thank you so much, guys. Sorry to shoot a little bit early.
You're good. You're good. We'll wrap things up here when you go. All right, brother.
Take care, y'all.
Drive safe.
All right, now he's gone. Okay.
I knew
That
you were
guy.
gonna do that, man. I knew you were going to do that.
I'm that
seriously.
predictable. I apologize.
You are. You're so predictable. For those who don't know, I've actually gone and met with Aaron. And we went to the museum, Boston Museum. That was fun. Lots of ancient stuff. Filmed a lot of that. Never used any of that film that we did in the museum. I don't know why. I just never did.
You'll find an excuse. There's always a reason.
There's some. Who knows? Gospel of Galactus. I've pondered this subject very loosely a lot, but I would be willing to bet aliens would be wildly different than anything we come up with because life loves to mess with expectations. Kane.
I think it is definitely the case that we have little ability to predict the form of those extraterrestrials and their psychology. In fact, one of the sections of the book, we actually speculate on what could an alien religion be like? Well, like the actual religion of the extraterrestrials. And our main conclusion from there is we see just how weirdly contingent our myths and stories and religious views are, that they are based on pure accidents of biology and cosmology. We actually give, I think, probably the most fun example that your viewers will appreciate is the Gospel of Mark and its story of the Gerasene demoniac. I think Dennis MacDonald has very strongly shown that this is based on the story of the Cyclops from Homer's Odyssey. So that Polyphemus, which means many voice, becoming then the many demons haunting the Gerasene demoniac. I think the evidence for there is very strong. But then the question is, well, where does Homer get this idea of a Cyclops? And you actually go back and you say that actually the stories of Cyclopses might actually come from the accidental discovery of elephant bones that were left from elephants that went extinct before humans ever came in. And if you look at an elephant skull, you don't know what it is. And there's this big hole for where the trunk was, but not there anymore. It looks like it's just this big hole in the skull of some ugly looking dude. Oh.
And they're massive, so they're larger than human.
Yeah, and the fact that it looks like just one big hole for an eye, but it's like, oh, maybe this is actually the origin of the Cyclops. And the thing is, the evolution of elephants is just an accident of Earth history. There's not going to be elephants necessarily on every single planet with life on it. That would be quite the convergent evolution if that were true. And so you realize there's no way then the aliens could develop that same story of the Gerasene demoniac because it was dependent on this chain of accidents and authorial intentions that all are based on trivial little details of how the story of life developed here on Earth. And you can see similar things with our stories of the stars and constellations. If you're in a different part of the galaxy, you're going to have completely different constellations. And of course, you're probably not going to have the same images in the sky because it's like, well, we have like the big and little bear. Well, if you're on a planet without bears, you're not going to imagine bears in the sky and have stories of how bears got up there. So all these weird contingencies mean like we have no ability to predict what an alien religion would look like, which also means if they did come here and they had a religion very similar to ours, that would actually be very strange and I think actually evidence for theism. The chances of them developing a similar theology to humans completely independently is very hard to explain on just random chance.
That's why I thought, I mean, like, to give a little pushback about some natural phenomena that lead toward some systematic theological or mythological narrative. You have like ancient aliens. We've all seen it where people are making crop circles, or they're drawing giant figurines in the earth of what looks like human type beings, but they're actually aliens. Or we find natural like plateaus, mountaintop plateaus that are flat, looking almost like perfectly flat tables, as if, who made that? I actually think that's where the idea of giants may have come from. Ronald Hindle talks about this in the Hebrew Bible with you had these nomadic people, probably due to drought and agricultural caused them to have to uplift and leave civilization in the Middle East. And a lot of these massive civilizations, people who had lots of people there help build these massive structures, leave, and then centuries later, the next civilization comes in. They find this abandoned giant civilization. You know how people think the pyramids are built by aliens. So they see these giant walls and they go, they had to be giants. You know, us, our little 15-man crew or 100-man crew, we couldn't build this. It had to be big humans, giants. And so a lot of these kind of myths come from that. So I could see another world if rock formations and planets are made of rocks and things like that also do that. I could see some overlap, and it not necessarily imply theism, but and this goes back to my point about life. If life, based on our understanding of the elements and such, chemistry into biology in some way, share that common kind of cannibalistic survival mechanism, and they're all close to a star that warms it and gives it light for it to have some type of plant life, grow, whatever, there's probably going to be potential overlap at some point in their history to what they're experiencing. And I do think religion is a reflection often of the world in which people live. And why do we die? Why don't we live forever? You know, questions, existential questions that life force is trying to describe and explain about the world they live in. So I don't know if it necessarily would imply theism. It would to me, though, if they went, meet our Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You know, like, and they spoke English, or like there's some way in which it was so universal that there's people on another planet literally speaking English who have a place called America. And there's, you know, like that would really raise some like statistical flags in my head go, hold up. But just because I saw common things wouldn't necessarily mean for me.
Oh, yeah. And that's what I mean, that, if we found like the same theology happening with the same sorts of stories, it's like, there's like almost no chance of that developing accidentally. But we have to also be careful if we're looking for it too hard. I'll give a anecdote for that, because I mentioned the idea of Jesuits coming down the gangway from the alien spacecraft. It's like, all right, if that happened, that would be, you know, clearly impressive, because it's like, not only are they Christians, but they're a particular order of the Catholic Church coming from there. It's like, okay, the chances of that happening are wildly improbable. Right. But the Jesuits have also, in their past, have kind of accidentally done this sort of thing. So when the first Jesuits were going to China in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries and trying to, spread the word, they were also then having to learn the language, read their text to try to translate and interpret their beliefs into something the Chinese could then better handle. And they're reading their histories, and this movement amongst some of the Jesuits was that, hey, if you read all of Chinese history figuratively, they got the entire story of the Bible. That you just have to squint just right, and everything is there. And this movement was called figurism, because they're literally taking everything figurative, and they get the whole kit and caboodle of the story of salvation and all that. It's like, I think only like maybe a dozen Jesuits ever actually believed it, but nonetheless, that's the thing. Is like, if you're looking a little too hard, you'll find anything you're looking for. It just becomes looking in the tea leaves and interpreting what you want. So
I do like what you said, though. Like elephants, they get this they have the hole in their skull. It looks like a cyclops, the narrative of a cyclops. What are the odds that another planet would have that exact narrative type thing? It doesn't have to be identical with the same names, but you know, the concept, and that would really raise some serious flags. I would still want to approach it skeptically, but I would look at it and go, whoa, what the heck is up with this thing we call life? It seems universal in some way. But then again, what if we found out something in the natural order of things kind of caused that to be the case in the universe?
Yeah. And of course, we might also say that maybe really ancient aliens is correct. The aliens brought all of our religious movements here. And if I may quote from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, you got to read Shakespeare. He's better in the original Klingon.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Gospel of Galactus. Is it Galactus? Yeah. Imneg. Once a person decides to believe in something, they will start to see all kinds of things to validate that belief. So here's a question. Is there any physicist coming out sounding the alarm on the so-called evidence of UFO?
Well, I mean, you can find some physicists who are very much physicists or astronomers who very much believe in the UFO phenomenon. Probably the most prominent astronomer who's been really pushing for the idea that we actually had a visitor and astronomers recorded it is a astronomer from Harvard, Avi Loeb. He basically said that this interstellar object that came in our solar system, what was it now, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? I'm forgetting exactly. It was called Oumuamua. That was the name we gave it. It comes from a Hawaiian word for scout. And we know it actually came from outside of our solar system because of its orbital energy, that there's no way it could have actually just been in orbit around the sun. This is something that basically shot through and shot back out and is never coming back. Most astronomers figured this is something like a comet, but a comet that originated from another star system. Loeb suggests that actually it has this weird trajectory in its motions that suggest that actually it is a light sail and is actually a sign of alien technology. And he's had a very hard time convincing other astronomers that he's right, and for good reason. There are good scientific grounds for doubting what he's saying, besides the initial improbability that it's alien tech. At the very least, the story of this thing coming in is a bit interesting, because the story of this interstellar object of this shape, this like oblong shape that this object had, is very similar to another Arthur C. Clarke story called Rendezvous with Rama, where this giant cylinder comes in from interstellar space and everyone realizes, oh, this is actually an alien craft, and then it zips around the sun. And a team of astronomers astronauts land on it and go inside and find out like this basically giant cylinder-sized city. That does not happen in this case. Unfortunately, we didn't send any astronauts to Oumuamua. But I was like, when that thing came in, it's like, oh, we had an opportunity to call it Rama, but we missed it.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of really smart people who can make that kind of conclusion that they're aliens or whatnot. And just throwing the two up there before we leave this super chat, really appreciate the support, Imnag. In your head, it's far more plausible, I imagine, based on what you see in your experience and learning. I'm sure Jonathan would probably agree that alien life is, I mean, that we could potentially be being visited, or there's some extraterrestrial life that may be. I don't think it is. I think we're perceiving things, or we're making misjudgments about what we're seeing, or whatever it might be. There's also the fact that humans are fickle, and we hallucinate, we see things, we all sorts of things that can explain why we think we see things. But that's far more plausible in your mind than the idea of the omni-god.
Oh, yeah. Well, at the very least, aliens don't have to break the laws of physics to exist. Right. They don't have to break the laws of physics to get here. It's just basically an engineering problem and a social problem, where the aliens even have the will to trek across the stars to come and visit us and then bother somebody in the hills of Nebraska or what have you. So there's all those initial implausibilities, but you could also say the same thing about a deity, about the aliens. If the aliens want to come here, that seems weird. If God wants to come here in human form, it's like, that is not any less weird, right. Initially, it would seem. And at the very least, we know potentially how we could build a spaceship that could go to the stars. We just know that it will take geological periods of time to get there. Mm-hmm. That we don't have to break physics for that to work. For Omni-God, we need physics to be broken on a daily basis.
Well said. Someone quote that. Someone needs to go around and coin that. Constellation Pegasus is the fine-tuning argument in the book. That's really getting old.
Yeah, we only touch it a little bit, just in the way that Jonathan mentioned earlier, that you could imagine a universe absolutely teeming with life, a universe where the only life in the entirety of the cosmos and life where it's just, kind of like randomly spread around. Which version of the universe would theism predict? And the thing is, different arguments for theism give you different results. So if you take fine-tuning, it becomes a bit distracted from the ideas like, well, if the universe is fine-tuned for life, why is it that it barely exists anywhere? It's just barely clawing onto the surface of this one rock, and potentially this is the only rock in the entire solar system with life on it. You would say, the universe is built for life. Okay, and how much life is in the universe? Well, that one speck over there. That's what the universe is for. It's like, I think your proportionality is a bit off there, buddy.
Right. And it's a great humbling thing to consider. I like the image from one of the space shuttles we have out that has the speck of Earth. I mean, it's like a dot, and
Yes. That the image you're probably referring to, there's two images. The most famous one was taken by the Voyager 1 probe in the early 1990s, where it turned around to take an image of Earth, and the entirety of Earth is just this one pixel caught in a internal reflection in the optics of the probe.
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, there seemed like a light, almost like caught up in a light a little bit. This dot, it's nothing.
Technically, if you were taking this photo, you would have said, "Oh, I'm going to delete that because you got this weird reflection inside the optics of your camera." But there wasn't going to be any more opportunities because the probe doesn't have the energy to keep taking these pictures. And secondly, Sagan was able to look at this image and masterfully create his. Even though he wasn't a poet, his use of prose feels like poetry. He was a wordsmith beyond what almost any other astronomer is able to do.
Wow. Thank you, Constellation. Van Schenk Guitars, just to say thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. It is appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate the support, and I'm glad that you are getting some positive feedback out of this. Bilal Kolkak, thank you for that, Kolkak. Thank you for that super chat. I think it's super chat, super sticker, whatever that is. Thank you so much for that. We are caught up here. I didn't want to leave anybody hanging. Dr. Adair, why should people get the book?
Well, there's only one way to salvation, and this happens to be the only one true book that will get you there. All the other ones might make that claim, but we have the science to back us up. We do the math. It touches so many fascinating subjects that, we touch, pure physics and mathematics. We do computer simulations. We talk about what is the nature of intelligence, how we can go and possibly detect it all, and what are the societal and religious implications of it all. So if you're an atheist, you could see, hey, here are problems that religions are going to have. If you're religious, you could say, here are the things that you're going to want to be considering if aliens come by. And some religions will be in better shape than others. The Mormons, they're going to be okay. The Scientologists, less so than you think. The Catholics, they have more explaining to do than other groups. And this was a lot of fun to create. I think there's a lot that a reader will learn from it. And I also hope it creates some interesting conversations and see where religious beliefs can go. And even as non-believers, knowing that the search for life beyond Earth has implications for our future, that we can actually realize if we do discover life beyond here, that actually gives us reason for hope. And the reasons to be scared of life forms out there, I think we give some reasons why the universe isn't as scary as sometimes science fiction makes it.
Well, I hope people will sign up. Let me see what our poll says here. I did pin the book at the top with the Amazon link. Have you ever bought a book by Jonathan M.S. Pierce or Dr. Aaron Adair? 85% have not. 8% mind you, there's 387 votes. Going to grab it one now. So 8% is going to grab a book from you or him or this book, which I hope they get. And then if 6% of our viewers have. So there's a huge market of people who have not purchased any of your books. And hopefully we can get them to tune in. You've got the Nativity. You've got the Nativity. Jonathan has all sorts of books, and this one.
Small correction there. Jonathan wrote the Nativity. I wrote on just one part of the Nativity, the Star of Bethlehem portion of that. So in some ways, mine is kind of a sequel or extended appendix of his Nativity book because I do all the astronomy or alleged astronomy to explain the Nativity story.
I really appreciate you. It's always fun to learn from you, and being someone who's a big science guru and loves to learn about all the science out there, it's great to have you on. If anyone's interested in seeing another version of this interview that you haven't watched, you can watch over at Gnostic Informant. I know that you guys did it, and I'm sure you covered things we didn't even discuss because there's so much to cover on this. And maybe we can have you back to cover more, get into the theology problems and such.
Oh, yeah. Like one thing we didn't touch at all, and it's something that even the astrotheologians haven't realized they need to touch on. How does eschatology work with aliens?
Are they going to come and blow us up?
Oh, there's that eschatology, but also how do you have a new heavens and a new earth when there are trillions of Earths.
Ooh, there's all sorts of stuff to cover. I seriously appreciate you, Dr. Adair. Get the book, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the like button on this. Share it out. Drop a comment. And if you feel like you could financially support, join the Patreon. We do work very hard to try and bring you fun conversations like this and educate the general public. So thank you, Aaron. Hope you had fun.
Absolutely. Always good to be here.
And never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.